Maria Santos had always been different from the other kids in her small Texas border town. While her classmates played with dolls and toy cars, she spent hours reading military history books borrowed from the dusty library downtown. Her father, a mechanic at the local auto shop, would shake his head when he found her studying battle strategies instead of doing homework. "Mija, why don't you read something normal for girls your age?" he would ask, not understanding his daughter's fascination with warfare and tactics. But Maria's dreams were bigger than anyone in Laredo could imagine. She wanted to serve her country, to lead soldiers, to make a difference that mattered. At 17, she walked into the Army recruitment office with determination burning in her eyes. The recruiter, Sergeant Thompson, looked up from his paperwork with surprise. "You sure you're in the right place, sweetheart? The community college is down the street." Maria straightened her shoulders. "I want to enlist, sir. I want to be a soldier." Thompson chuckled and pushed a stack of brochures across the desk. "Look, kid, the Army's not a game. Why don't you think about nursing or administration? Those are good careers for young ladies." Despite the condescending tone, Maria signed her papers that day. Basic training at Fort Benning was brutal. The drill sergeants seemed determined to break her spirit, assigning her extra duties and pushing her harder than the male recruits. "Santos, drop and give me 50, Staff Sergeant Miller would bark whenever she made the slightest mistake. Her fellow recruits weren't much better. They whispered behind her back, questioning whether a small Latina girl belonged among warriors. But Maria persevered, finishing near the top of her class in both physical fitness and tactical knowledge. After basic training, she applied for officer candidate school. Her commanding officer, Captain Reynolds, called her into his office with a concerned expression. "Santos, I admire your dedication, but leadership positions require a certain presence. Have you considered specializing in intelligence or communications? Those are valuable roles, too." Maria's jaw tightened. "With respect, sir, I believe I can lead soldiers effectively regardless of my gender or background." Reynolds sighed. "I'm not saying you can't. I'm saying the men might not follow a young woman into combat. It's just reality." Despite his doubts, Maria's test scores and performance records spoke for themselves. She was accepted into OCS, where she faced even greater challenges. The instructors seemed to take pleasure in pointing out every minor flaw in her leadership exercises. "Lieutenant Candidate Santos," Major Davidson announced during a field exercise, "your tactical approach shows promise, but soldiers need to respect their leaders instinctively. That kind of respect is earned through experience and, well, certain qualities that can't be taught." The other candidates smirked, but Maria kept her expression neutral. She had learned to let their doubts fuel her determination rather than discourage her. After graduating as a second lieutenant, Maria was assigned to Fort Hood, where she joined the 1st Cavalry Division. Her platoon sergeant, a grizzled veteran named Master Sergeant Johnson, greeted her with barely concealed skepticism. "So, you're my new LT," he said, looking her up and down. "Hope you're ready for the real Army, ma'am. This isn't school anymore." The soldiers in her platoon tested her constantly. They would forget to follow orders, arrive late to formations, and generally act as if she were invisible. Maria knew she had to prove herself through actions, not words. During her first field training exercise, the platoon was tasked with securing a mock village from insurgent forces. Maria studied the terrain maps for hours, developing a strategy that would minimize casualties while achieving their objectives. "Listen up," she addressed her reluctant soldiers. "We're going to approach from the east, using the ridgeline for cover. 2nd Squad will provide overwatch, while 1st Squad advances through the buildings." Private Williams, a particularly troublesome soldier, raised his hand mockingly. "Ma'am, shouldn't we just charge in and get it over with? That's what real soldiers do." Several men chuckled, but Maria maintained her composure. "We're not cowboys, Private. We're professional soldiers. Lives depend on smart tactics." The exercise went flawlessly. Maria's careful planning resulted in 0 simulated casualties while successfully completing the mission. Even Master Sergeant Johnson seemed grudgingly impressed. "Not bad for a first-timer," he admitted privately. "Maybe you'll work out after all." But Maria's real test came during her first deployment to Afghanistan. The battalion was stationed at Forward Operating Base Chapman, a dusty outpost surrounded by hostile territory. The other officers treated her politely but distantly, making it clear she was an outsider. Colonel Harrison, the battalion commander, was a 40-year veteran who had served in Vietnam, Grenada, and both Gulf Wars. He had never commanded female officers in combat roles and made no secret of his old-school views. "Santos," he said during her initial briefing, "I know you're eager to prove yourself, but combat leadership is different from training exercises. I'm assigning you to supply coordination. It's vital work, and you'll be safe." Maria felt her heart sink. "Sir, I'm qualified for combat operations. My training scores are impressive," the colonel interrupted, "but I'm responsible for every soldier in this unit. I won't risk lives to make a political statement about women in combat." The supply depot assignment was professional suicide. While her male peers led patrols and earned combat experience, Maria spent her days managing inventory and coordinating logistics. She watched from the sidelines as other lieutenants gained the experience necessary for promotion. Months passed in frustration. Maria performed her assigned duties flawlessly, but she knew her career was stagnating. Other officers treated her like a clerk rather than a peer, and she began to wonder if everyone had been right about the limitations she faced. The breaking point came during a staff meeting where Colonel Harrison discussed patrol assignments. Lieutenant Brooks, who had joined the unit after Maria, was assigned to lead a crucial reconnaissance mission. "Sir," Maria spoke up, "I request consideration for field operations. I have the training and the men know me now." The room fell silent. Colonel Harrison's face darkened with irritation. "Lieutenant Santos, we've discussed this. Your current assignment is important to our mission success." "But, sir, I didn't join the Army to count supplies. I joined to lead soldiers." Harrison's voice turned cold. "What you joined for and what the Army needs are two different things. You're dismissed, Lieutenant." As Maria left the meeting, she heard Colonel Harrison's voice behind her, speaking to his executive officer. "These young officers think they know better than decades of military experience. Some people need to learn their place." That night, Maria sat in her small quarters, staring at a photo of her family. Her younger brother had enlisted in the Marines and was already leading combat patrols. Her father had finally begun bragging about his daughter, the Army officer, not knowing she spent her days as a glorified warehouse manager. She thought about resigning, about returning to Texas and finding a civilian job where her gender wouldn't be a constant obstacle. But something inside her refused to give up. She had come too far and overcome too much to quit now. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Intelligence reports indicated increased enemy activity in their sector. The Taliban was planning something big, and every available officer would soon be needed for combat operations. Maria began preparing herself mentally and physically for the opportunity she knew must come. She studied the local terrain maps, reviewed insurgent tactics, and maintained her equipment with meticulous care. Her soldiers had finally begun to respect her competence, even if the brass didn't. Little did she know that within days, a routine patrol would turn into a firefight that would test every lesson she had learned. And in that moment of crisis, all the doubts and discrimination she had faced would either destroy her or forge her into the leader she had always known she could become. The morning sun rose over the Afghan mountains, painting the sky brilliant orange. Maria Santos stood at her window, watching another day begin in a war zone, unaware that this day would change not only her life, but the course of military history itself. The emergency alarm shattered the morning quiet at Forward Operating Base Chapman. Maria Santos dropped her coffee mug and rushed toward the command center, her heart pounding as she heard the radio chatter about a patrol under heavy fire. "We need immediate support!" Lieutenant Brooks's voice crackled through the radio, panic evident even through the static. "We're pinned down and taking heavy casualties." Colonel Harrison stood over the radio operator, his face grim. The patrol that was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance had walked into a carefully planned ambush. 3 soldiers were already wounded, and the enemy had superior position and numbers. "Get me air support," Harrison barked to his communications officer. "And prep a relief column." "Sir," the operator replied, checking his equipment frantically. "The helicopters are grounded due to weather and our backup radio systems are down. We can't coordinate with higher command." Maria watched from the doorway as the situation deteriorated rapidly. Through the radio transmissions, she could hear gunfire and shouting. Men were dying while the command staff struggled with communication failures and limited options. "What about the eastern approach?" Major Stevens suggested, pointing to a map. "We could flank them through the valley." Harrison shook his head. "Too risky. The terrain is unknown, and we don't have recent intelligence on that sector." Maria stepped forward, her mind racing. She had spent months studying those maps during her supply coordination duties, learning every trail and ridgeline out of sheer boredom and thoroughness. "Sir, I know that terrain," she said quietly. The room fell silent. Colonel Harrison turned slowly, his expression a mixture of irritation and disbelief. "Lieutenant Santos, this is not the time for—" "Colonel, I've studied every inch of those maps. There's a goat path that runs behind the ridge where they're positioned. It's narrow, but a small team could use it to get above the ambush site." Harrison's face reddened. "Lieutenant, you have no combat experience. I'm not sending soldiers into danger based on map reading." The radio crackled again with Brooks' increasingly desperate voice. "Colonel, we need help now. Johnson is hit bad, and we're running low on ammunition." Maria's frustration boiled over. "Sir, with respect, those are our soldiers out there. I know I can help them." "Absolutely not," Harrison snapped. "You'll stay here and coordinate supplies." "That's an order." But as the minutes ticked by and the situation grew more desperate, other officers began looking at the maps Maria had mentioned. Major Stevens quietly asked her to explain the route she had identified. "Here," Maria pointed to a barely visible line on the topographical map. "Local shepherds use this path to move between villages. It's steep, but it leads directly above the ambush site. A small fire team could provide covering fire while the main force extracts." Stevens studied the route carefully. "How do you know about shepherd paths?" "I talked to the local interpreters during supply runs. They told me about hidden routes the Taliban use to move weapons. This path goes both ways." Meanwhile, the radio reports from the trapped patrol grew increasingly dire. 2 more soldiers had been wounded, and enemy reinforcements seemed to be arriving. Time was running out. Colonel Harrison stood frozen, weighing impossible options. Every conventional rescue plan required resources he didn't have or carried unacceptable risks. His decades of experience had not prepared him for this exact scenario. Finally, Master Sergeant Johnson, who had worked with Maria for months, spoke up. "Sir, Lieutenant Santos knows those supply routes better than anyone. Her logistics work took her all over this sector." Harrison glared at him. "Are you suggesting I send an inexperienced officer into combat based on conversations with interpreters?" "Sir," Maria interrupted, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I'm not asking you to send me. I'm asking you to let me volunteer. Those soldiers don't have time for perfect solutions." The radio erupted with automatic weapons fire and shouting. Lieutenant Brooks's voice came through broken and strained. "We can't hold this position much longer." Harrison stared at the map, then at Maria, his internal conflict visible on his weathered face. Everything in his experience told him this was wrong. Female officers didn't lead combat rescue missions. Untested lieutenants didn't develop tactical solutions that experienced commanders had missed. But men were dying, and conventional options had been exhausted. "If I authorize this," he said slowly, "you take Sergeant Martinez and 2 volunteers, no more. You provide covering fire only, then extract immediately. No heroics, no unnecessary risks." Maria's heart leaped, but she kept her expression professional. "Understood, sir?" Within minutes, she had gathered her small team. Sergeant Martinez, a steady veteran who had worked with her during supply operations, volunteered immediately. Corporals Davis and Williams, despite their earlier skepticism about female leadership, stepped forward when they heard the plan. "Ma'am," Williams said quietly, "Brooks is a good guy. Let's go get him." As they prepared to leave, Colonel Harrison pulled Maria aside. His expression was conflicted, mixing authority with genuine concern. "Santos, if this goes wrong, it's on my head. Don't make me regret this decision." "You won't, sir. I promise." The trek to the Shepherd's Path was grueling. Maria led her team through rocky terrain that would have been challenging in daylight, but they were moving in the harsh Afghan sun with full combat gear. Each step had to be carefully placed to avoid loose rocks that might alert enemy positions. As they climbed higher, the sound of gunfire became clearer. Through her binoculars, Maria could see the ambush site below. The enemy had positioned themselves expertly, with clear fields of fire and good cover. Brooks and his men were trapped in a shallow depression with minimal protection. "There," she whispered to Martinez, pointing to enemy positions. 12 fighters, maybe more. They're focused on the patrol below." Martinez studied the tactical situation. "Ma'am, if we can get to that outcrop, we'll have clear shots at their flank, but it means crossing about 50 meters of open ground." Maria calculated the risks. The enemy was focused downward on the trapped patrol. Her team had the advantage of surprise and elevation. But if they were spotted during the crossing, they would be trapped just like Brooks' men. "We go one at a time," she decided. "Martinez first, then Davis, then Williams. I'll go last and coordinate our covering fire." "Ma'am, you should go first. Let us cover you." Maria shook her head. "A leader's place is where she can best help her soldiers. That's here, coordinating until everyone's in position." The crossings seemed to take forever. Each man had to sprint across the exposed area, while the others watched for enemy movement. Maria's heart hammered as she watched her soldiers take the risk she had asked of them. When her turn came, she sprinted across the rocky ground with everything she had learned in training. Halfway across, she heard shouts in Dari from below. The enemy had spotted them. "Contact right!" Martinez called out as AK-47 fire erupted from the rocks below. Maria dove behind cover as bullets sparked off the stones around her. Now they were committed. There was no retreat from this position. "Davis! Williams! Suppressive fire on the eastern positions!" she commanded. "Martinez, you take the western group." Her team opened fire with disciplined, aimed shots. Below, she could hear the enemy's attention splitting between the trapped patrol and this new threat from above. It was exactly what they needed. "Brooks, this is Santos," she radioed. "We have overwatch. Move your wounded during our next volley." "Santos?" Brooks's voice was incredulous even in the middle of combat. "What are you doing out here?" "Saving your bacon, apparently. On my mark." "Mark." Maria's team unleashed coordinated suppressive fire, forcing the enemy to take cover. Below, she watched Brooks's soldiers begin moving their wounded toward better positions. But the enemy was adapting quickly. Some fighters began moving to flank her position while others maintained fire on the trapped patrol. Maria realized they had bought time, but the situation was still critical. "Martinez, we need to keep moving. They're trying to surround us." "Roger, ma'am. Where to?" Maria studied the terrain with new eyes, seeing possibilities she had never considered during peaceful map study. Real combat was nothing like classroom exercises, but her months of careful preparation suddenly crystallized into clear understanding. "We're going to leapfrog to that ridge line," she pointed to a position that would give them better angles on the enemy positions. Same order as before. As her team began moving, Maria felt something she had never experienced before. This wasn't about proving herself anymore. This wasn't about gender or discrimination or career advancement. This was about bringing soldiers home alive. And for the first time since arriving in Afghanistan, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The firefight raged for another 30 minutes as Maria's team provided crucial covering fire from their elevated position. Her careful tactical movements had turned the tide of the ambush, allowing Brooks and his men to evacuate their wounded and establish better defensive positions. "Last magazine!" Corporal Davis called out, his voice strained from the extended engagement. Maria checked her own ammunition. They were running low, but the enemy fire had noticeably decreased. Several Taliban fighters had been eliminated or forced to retreat by the unexpected assault from above. "Brooks, what's your status?" she radioed. "We're mobile again. 3 wounded, but we can move. Your fire support saved our lives, Santos." "Roger. We're going to cover your withdrawal, then extract ourselves. Move on my signal." Maria coordinated the complex withdrawal with precision that surprised even her. Each movement was timed to provide maximum cover while minimizing exposure. Her months of studying tactical manuals and terrain maps had prepared her for this moment better than she had ever realized. As Brooks's patrol disappeared into the safety of the valley, Maria led her own team's careful retreat down the treacherous shepherd's path. They moved with purpose but without panic, checking their six constantly for pursuing enemy fighters. An hour later, they reached the relative safety of Forward Operating Base Chapman. News of the successful rescue had already spread among the soldiers. Men who had barely acknowledged Maria's existence before now watched her with new respect as she led her exhausted team through the gate. Colonel Harrison was waiting at the command post, his expression unreadable. Maria expected anger, perhaps a reprimand for exceeding her authority. Instead, he studied her with curiosity, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Lieutenant Santos," he said formally. "Report." Maria straightened despite her fatigue. "Sir, we successfully provided overwatch for Lieutenant Brooks' patrol withdrawal. Enemy contact eliminated or dispersed. No friendly casualties during the rescue operation." Harrison nodded slowly. "Walk with me." They moved away from the listening ears of other staff members. The colonel's silence stretched uncomfortably as they walked toward his quarters. 37 years I've been in this army," Harrison finally said. "I thought I'd seen everything, thought I knew what leadership looked like." Maria remained silent, unsure where this conversation was heading. "You disobeyed my direct order about avoiding unnecessary risks." "Yes, sir." "You put yourself and 3 soldiers in danger based on information gathered during supply runs." "Yes, sir." Harrison stopped walking and turned to face her. "And you saved 8 American lives by doing it." He extended his hand. "Outstanding work, Lieutenant." Maria shook his hand, hardly believing what she was hearing. "Sir, You what? You proved that I was wrong about you, that I let my prejudices cloud my judgment?" Harrison's voice carried both regret and admiration. "You outperformed seasoned officers today, Santos. That kind of tactical thinking and leadership doesn't come from a textbook." Over the following weeks, everything changed for Maria. Colonel Harrison assigned her to lead combat patrols, and her reputation spread throughout the battalion. Soldiers who had once questioned her authority now competed to serve under her command. But Maria's biggest challenge still lay ahead. 3 months after the rescue operation, she received an unexpected summons to the command post. When she arrived, she found Colonel Harrison talking with a civilian she didn't recognize. "Lieutenant Santos," Harrison said with unusual formality, I'd like you to meet Dr. Patricia Whitman from the Defense Department's Office of Women's Policy. Dr. Whitman stepped forward with a professional smile. Lieutenant, I've heard remarkable things about your service here. The department is very interested in your experiences as a female combat leader. Maria felt her stomach drop. Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. And doing it exceptionally well, according to Colonel Harrison's reports. That's why I'm here. We're documenting successful integration of women in combat roles, and your story could help shape future policy. With respect, ma'am, I don't want to be anyone's poster child for women in combat. I just want to be a soldier. Dr. Whitman exchanged glances with Colonel Harrison. Lieutenant, whether you like it or not, you've already become a symbol. The question is whether you'll help us tell the story accurately. Before Maria could respond, her radio crackled with an urgent message. All available officers to the command post immediately. We have an urgent situation developing. The three of them rushed back inside where Major Stevens was coordinating a flurry of activity. Colonel, we just received word that a high-value target has been located in our sector. This is big, possibly Taliban regional leadership, but the window for action is very small. Harrison studied the intelligence reports. What's the timeline? 6 hours maximum. After that, they'll be gone for months, maybe permanently. What about support assets? Stevens shook his head. Everything's committed to operations in other provinces. We're on our own for this one. Maria looked at the target location on the map. It was in the same region where she had led the rescue operation, terrain she now knew intimately. Sir, she said quietly, I know that area. The approach routes, the escape paths, everything. Harrison looked at her thoughtfully, then at Dr. Whitman, who was watching the exchange with intense interest. Santos, this isn't a rescue operation. This is a direct assault on a hardened target. High risk, high reward. I understand, sir. The room fell silent as Harrison weighed his decision. This was exactly the kind of operation that could make or break careers. Success would eliminate dangerous enemies. Failure could result in dead soldiers and political embarrassment. All right, he decided. Santos, you'll lead the assault team. You have 4 hours to plan and brief. Use whoever you need. As Maria began coordinating with the intelligence officers, Dr. Whitman pulled Colonel Harrison aside. Colonel, are you sure about this? The political implications if something goes wrong? Harrison watched Maria work, seeing the natural way soldiers deferred to her judgment and expertise. Doctor, 3 months ago I would have agreed with you, but I've learned that leadership isn't about gender or politics. It's about competence and character. Santos has both. The mission launched just after sunset. Maria led a team of 12 soldiers through the same mountainous terrain she had navigated during the rescue operation. But this time, she was the primary leader, responsible for every decision and every life. The approach went flawlessly. Her knowledge of the local terrain allowed them to avoid enemy sentries and reach the target compound undetected. When they struck, the assault was swift and decisive. 2 hours later, they returned to base with 3 high-value prisoners and a treasure trove of intelligence documents. No American casualties, and a major blow struck against Taliban operations in the region. As Maria led her team through the gate, she saw Dr. Whitman standing with Colonel Harrison, both watching her with expressions of profound respect. But she also noticed something else. A convoy of vehicles had arrived while they were on the mission. Black SUVs with government plates and serious-looking men in suits. Colonel Harrison approached as her team dispersed to debrief and rest. Santos, we need to talk. There are some people here who want to meet you. Sir, I haven't finished my mission report yet. Harrison smiled. Your mission report can wait. The President of the United States would like a word. Maria felt her knees go weak. Sir? You heard correctly, Lieutenant. Turns out your story reached some very high places. Dr. Whitman here has been preparing a report for the White House about women in combat leadership. Your missions over the past few months became the primary case study. As they walked toward the command post, Harrison continued. The president is touring military installations in the region. When he heard about an officer who had revolutionized tactical thinking while being initially dismissed due to gender bias, he insisted on meeting you personally. Colonel, I'm not ready for this. I'm dusty and tired and— Santos, Harrison interrupted gently. You've been ready for this your whole life. You just didn't know it yet. When they reached the command post, Maria saw President Biden standing with his security detail, studying a map of the region. He looked up as she approached and extended his hand with a genuine smile. Lieutenant Santos, I've heard extraordinary things about your service. Colonel Harrison tells me you've redefined what leadership looks like in combat situations. Maria shook his hand, still hardly believing this was happening. Mr. President, I was just doing my job. No, Lieutenant, you were doing much more than that. You were proving that talent and leadership come in all forms, and that our military is strongest when we judge people by their abilities, not their demographics. The president turned to address the room. This young officer represents the best of American military leadership. She didn't ask for special treatment, didn't demand recognition, didn't use her gender as either an excuse or an advantage. She simply served with distinction and saved American lives. He looked back at Maria. Lieutenant, Colonel Harrison has recommended you for immediate promotion and assignment to the Army War College. Your insights into mountain warfare tactics are going to be studied by the next generation of military leaders. Maria's mind reeled. 6 months ago, she had been managing supply inventories while male peers earned combat experience. Now she was being fast-tracked for advanced military education. Sir, I'm honored, but nothing, Colonel Harrison interjected with a laugh. Santos, remember when you first asked me for combat assignments? I told you that you needed to learn your place in the Army. Maria nodded, remembering the sting of that conversation. Well, Harrison continued, it turns out your place is leading soldiers in combat and developing the tactical innovations that will keep them alive. I was wrong about what you could accomplish, but you were right to keep pushing. The president nodded approvingly. Colonel, it takes real character to admit when we've misjudged someone. And Lieutenant Santos, it takes even more character to prove your worth through performance rather than complaints. As the presidential convoy prepared to leave, President Biden pulled Maria aside for a final word. Lieutenant, you've changed how this country thinks about military leadership, but more importantly, you've shown young women everywhere that their dreams are achievable if they're willing to work for them. That's a responsibility I hope you'll embrace. After the convoy disappeared down the dusty road, Maria found herself alone with Colonel Harrison on the base perimeter. The Afghan sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky brilliant orange, just as it had on the morning that changed everything. Colonel, she said quietly, thank you for giving me the chance to prove myself. Harrison shook his head. Santos, I didn't give you anything. You earned every opportunity through competence and courage. I just finally got smart enough to recognize it. He paused, looking out at the mountains where she had led successful missions. You know what the real lesson is here? It's not about women in combat or changing military culture. It's about leadership being blind to everything except results. You saved lives, eliminated enemies, and inspired soldiers. That's what matters. Maria nodded, thinking about the long journey from that recruitment office in Laredo to this moment. Sir, what happens now? Now you go home, attend War College, and prepare for bigger responsibilities. And someday, when you're a colonel yourself, remember to look for potential in places where others might not think to look. As they walked back toward the command post, Harrison added with a chuckle. Besides, I owe you an apology dinner when we get back to the States. Best Mexican food in Texas, your choice of restaurant. Sir, you don't owe me anything. Santos, I laughed at your ambitions and nearly wasted your talents because of my own prejudices. I owe you much more than dinner. Maria smiled, thinking of her family back in Laredo, who would hardly believe their daughter had shaken hands with the president and earned the respect of a veteran colonel. Actually, sir, I know just the place. My father's mechanic shop has a taco truck that parks outside. Best breakfast burritos in South Texas. Harrison laughed. It's a deal, Lieutenant. It's a deal. The two officers walked back to base as the stars appeared over Afghanistan, both changed by the experience of learning that true leadership recognizes no boundaries except those imposed by character and competence.